James, good afternoon. James Williams, you are Professor of Modern French Literature and Film at Royal Holloway, where you are also Director of the Centre for Visual Cultures. You're this year's recipient of the Gapper Book Prize, and I want to congratulate you very warmly on this. It's for it's this wonderful book, Ethics and Aesthetics in Contemporary African Cinema, The Politics of Beauty. I wonder, James, to start off this conversation, if you might say a few words on what prompted you to work on this book.
Well, before I do that, thank you, Pat, for inviting me. I'm obviously very honoured to receive the award, the Gapper Prize, and it's very exciting for me to talk about the book. The origin, well, I suppose the origin was really my viewing of a film, the key film in the introduction and also in the first chapter, which is Bamako by Abderrahmane Sissoko. This was a film from 2006, which I saw and it blew me away. And I think the questions that it raised, questions I'd never really thought about before in terms of African cinema, propelled my wish to know more, see more, feel more in African cinema. I mean, it's a sub-Saharan film. It's a Mauritanian filmmaker, Sissoko, but made in Mali, made in Bamako, the capital, as the title says. And it's a film that is always doing more than, in a sense, one can understand or decipher or read as a critic. It's bringing into place so many different multi-stories, Sissoko calls them parables, so many lines of influence, so many characters, some real, some fictional. It's a whole kind of brassage of influences. And it's such that one can't take an easy kind of political message out of it. And for me, that was very new in my appreciation, of African cinema, which was, first of all, the work of Ousmane Sembène. That's the early work then, the 1960s, the first instances of post-colonial Black African cinema.
That's great.
I could say more about Bamako. It's such an extraordinary film.
There might be an opportunity as the conversation continues to come back to it and to use that as a kind of further point of example. What's the key idea then in your book? If you could talk a little bit about that? What's driving it?
What's driving it? Well, it is in a sense that idea that these films of the last 20 years, let's call them millennial, post-colonial art cinema, produced in the sub-Saharan region, are presenting new challenges for African film criticism. And they are doing things which do not allow the previous models of African film studies to understand the work, the processes involved. And one of them, and this is the main aspect, is the aesthetic itself. That for so long was demoted, made an object of suspicion. It was a Western kind of tainted idea in the work of Sembène and that period of politically engaged post-colonial cinema. But I'm seeing and working through films which are giving me a new sense of what beauty might be in this area of global cinema. So it's a beauty that is can be abstract, migrant, can be resistant, can be material, erotic, queer, all sorts of things which have not really been acknowledged even by the majority of African film critics who are still reading these films through the prism, if you like, of the earlier period. The earlier period also of African film theorists, in particular Tishome Gabriel, a pioneering film theorist who championed the work of Sembène. So I'm trying to, in this book, understand what is, for me, a much more non-conceptual form of filmmaking that doesn't present a message, a political message. Yet I claim that that process itself is ethical and political in nature. And I use the idea of the baobab, the figure of the baobab tree, which is a key topos in African culture, but also in African cinema, and championed and promoted by Son Ben for political reasons. But I see that as a kind of emblem of a fixed understanding of what African knowledge and culture is. And I'm suggesting that these films that have been proliferating over the last 20 years in Western Central Africa principally, and principally Francophone, but some also Lusophone, some Anglophone, that they, in response to the new realities of Africa, and I could give you a long list of what they are, and obviously some come to mind immediately, like the mega city, like the increasing poverty, dictatorships, genocide, ethnocidal violence, the increased presence of the Chinese in the region. All these are creating a new set of questions, and these films are responding to them in new ways, new forms, and new expressions, new manifestations, I think, of the aesthetic.
Wonderful. I mean, I have to say, so it's clear, your argument is very clear, and you've also identified that critical topos, the baobab, which, you know, you wonderfully, I think, kind of identified at the beginning, you know, in reference to Ousmane Son Ben, and then you come back to it, you know, right throughout the book. And in particular, I'm thinking about that, you know, where you look at the detail of it in Life on Earth, that film from 1998, and that's, you know, well on into the book, around page 200 and whatever, 240. So you have the key idea, you have that strong driving argument, that image then of the baobab. Was it as straightforward as that? How, in terms of writing a book of this incredible range and scope? I mean, you know, for anybody who's listening to this interview who hasn't read the book, I mean, this is an extraordinary book in terms of its range and scope, its examination of contemporary African cinema, but an examination of contemporary African cinema that goes right back to its origins in 1960, Ousmane Son Ben in particular, and then brings us right up to the present and looks at it from a range of different angles, with an extraordinary, I mean, over 200 films are referenced, and the detail, the meticulous research that's undertaken really has to be, this book has to be read to appreciate that level. But during that process of research, of viewing, of analysis, of thinking, of putting it down on paper, were there difficulties and were there surprises?
It's a very good question, Pat. Yeah, I mean, just on a sort of practical level, there were difficulties in getting to certain parts of Africa that I wanted to go to, including Mali, including Burkina Faso. Ouagadougou, the capital, is the institutional center of African cinema, but it was too dangerous to go. I mean, the upshot of that was I could spend more time in Senegal, in particular Dakar, and that was very valuable for me to talk about the Afropolis, the mega city, the whole experience of that, and to really, you know, understand what is going on in that new environment. But in terms of kind of the intellectual sort of journey that I was taking, I mean, it's always, I think, a problem on one level, but a challenge. It's exciting, daunting, to be working on a live primary corpus. In other words, you know, I mean, the next day I would find there was a new film by Haroun, for example, Mohamed Saleh Haroun, the Chadian filmmaker who's very important in my book, or a short that he'd done. And you know, that's kind of the challenge of doing something which is developing in such a kind of exciting way. And I wanted to, you know, do justice to the proliferation of new material. And also, I mean, so that in itself is a kind of sense of surprise and wonder. I mean, there's something I really enjoy about that process, that you are always, catching up, you're also on guard, and you're also open to new possibilities. So that is very fruitful intellectually. But it cuts both ways. I want to say that. I mean, to come back to, as one example, Sissako. I mean, for me, Bamako, all is happening there. It's such an extraordinary film, going off in all directions. And that, for me, was what I wanted to address, embrace. But then I go to his next film, Timbuktu, and it seems to me almost the exact opposite of that. It seems to be the inversion of what he's trying to do with the free play of the aesthetic in Bamako. And I propose that and argue that what he's doing is, in a sense, giving us an idea, a conception of beauty which stills, which suspends the processes of the aesthetic that he was allowing to run so freely in Bamako. So, it doesn't always work that the next film is going to be, to match your expectations, but that again is a sense of surprise. And I think that the energy that I had writing that book comes in part from that sense that, what's going to happen next? What am I going to see next? What am I going to hear next? And those things that I thought I could sort of count on with a filmmaker could be reversed, or could take me off in a whole new direction. And so I suppose that the project is defined in a sense by a sense of unpredictability, which certainly corresponds to what I'm talking about here in terms of non-baobab, non-conceptual thinking. It's that sense of something more random, more free-flowing, more organic, more fluid. That was the nature of the project itself for me.
I'm really enjoying listening to you speak about the project, James. And it's interesting for me. I mean, I have picked out a sentence, and this sentence references Sissako as well as Haroun, and you've mentioned both of them. And it's this sentence. I'll read it if that's okay. I love this sentence for its great sweep. It's for its overview of your analysis to that point, and then it's kind of introduction to the transition in your argument. And the sentence is this. I quote: "If the point of departure for Sissako is the basic need for and permanent difficulty of speaking to and about the other, for Haroun it is rarefied silence and indecipherability." And I love that sentence. I love it for its craft, and I love it for its intellectuality as well. And what struck me, apart from its craft and its intellectual consideration of the works of these two filmmakers, is this notion of indecipherability, and that, if you like, reminded me of a word that comes up again and again, and that is of opacity. Obviously, people will come to that word opacity from different angles. For some, it'll be Edouard Glissant. There are a range of other ways of approach it. I wonder, just in terms of just the that aspect of the work of indecipherability, of opacity, and its relationship to the to the politics of beauty. Could I invite you to say a few words about that in any way that comes to mind?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a wonderful question, and it's a very rich question. I'm not sure I can answer it in full right now. I mean, just to put that quote in context, I think that comes in the chapter called Queering the Baobab, which is about male intimacy, masculinity, and it's sort of centered on the work of Haroun, where things can't be avowed, but they can be suggested, they can be felt, and abstraction is the way for Haroun to create that sort of possibility. And I think that, to come back to Glissant and Relation, I mean, which I plant early on, in the introduction, it's certainly, that is crucial for understanding Sissoko. It's crucial also for most of the filmmakers that I discuss. One of the key processes that I'm tracing in each of my sort of 5 big sort of thematic zones, and if I can just give that just so that it's clear to those who haven't perhaps read the book, that I'm dealing first with violence, structural violence, the violence of neoliberal globalization, and also violence of montage. I'm dealing with the megacity, the Acropolis, Dakar, my case study. I'm dealing with language. Language is a sort of open process of translation, where communication is not always available and maybe not even desirable. It's more the affect created through sound. I'm dealing with masculinity, as I say, in Querying the Baobab. And I'm finally dealing with migration cinema. And again, Sissoko is there, La Vie sur Terre, Life on Earth is a crucial part of that chapter, but talking about sort of how, Sissoko is creating a kind of transcultural process. In fact, I do have behind me an image from that film, which is a sort of an idea of something which is always kind of a composite frame of mixed influences. In this case, Fanon, Césaire, also the manuscript at the start of the film, L'Homme de Sokolo, his father, and other influences, including the radio. I mean, there's a whole kind of mix here. And I suppose that to sort of come back to what I'm trying to say in answer to your question, it is a sense of kind of relationality. I'm exploring an aesthetics of relationality in all of these chapters, in all of these films that I have sort of prioritized. And if one can sort of be sort of theoretical about it without getting too abstract, they are kind of aesthetic processes of relational difference that I am trying to work through, which doesn't presuppose a fixed destination. As with Glisson, the image of, they're in a slave hold of the ship, and where the slaves underneath don't know where they're going. This sense of the unknown, of unknowability, is at the start, if you like, is where I begin and remain. I mean, I don't end up with a message to my films that I'm studying or at the final stage of the book. And that's very important to me. And this is what is so different then from those earlier films that we talked about, the films by Ousmane Sembène and others of what was a sense African version of third cinema, where the message had to be deciphered. You go through the wax, to employ the term of Deschamps Gabriel, to get to the gold, the allegorical meaning, the political meaning, the ideological critique. Now, if you don't sort of adopt that model, you can then sort of plow a series of kind of more nebulous lines into the unknown. And for me, Glisson is crucial to thinking through that process. I should say that this is not a book about Glisson. I talk about other theorists who are dealing with sort of contemporary African realities, in particular Achille Mbembe, but also Suleiman Bachir Diagne is part of my project too, and talking about language. So there are ways in which I'm sort of working through ideas, but it's that sort of sense from Glisson that everything is in relation, and that includes a spectator. That we are implicated. We're implicated in a film like Bamako. We are being addressed. We are being forced to consider our role in this kind of neoliberal global condition. We are not separate from it. And I think that's really important about all the films that I'm looking at. These films of the last 20 years are not comfortable films in many ways. And they do verge on abstraction. They do verge on something which can't be read easily for all sorts of different reasons. I don't know if that answers your...
That's great. No, it actually, I mean, your answer is so rich, we could bring it in a whole series of other directions in terms of relationality, back to Glisson, the rhizomatic, as well as that the potential tension between the rhizomatic and the baobab, and it, in terms of the root. When you were referencing Aimé Césaire, and I can see his image in the background, I was thinking as well of Carnet d'un retour au pays natal, where again there's that very powerful image where he talks about the spectator. And the spectator cannot be indifferent to the dancing bear. That wonderful moment, and Césaire also, particularly in that long poem, working opacity into a politics of beauty, but also a politics of beauty that asks us to be involved and to think about questions of coloniality, of slavery, of the ruins of that. So it's when I listen to your response, it's just an invitation to go back into the book. And I'm now thinking, the book at the end, opens up to my mind is, I guess I'm thinking, well, what about other forms of filmmaking beyond the auteur and the auteur filmmaking? And you do that. You say, look at this. Look what's happening elsewhere. Look at what's happening in Nollywood. Look at the different kinds of genre that are at play there. And for my mind, for my money, that was a kind of a very exciting conclusion, which opens up another horizon. And I guess my question, and this is the final question for this kind of conversation, is, what's the next horizon?
Well, for me personally,
well, yes, in terms of moving from this book, does this book lead you into the next project, and have you identified that project?
I have. Let me explain that since this book came out, I've done a collection called Querying the Migrant in Contemporary European Cinema, which in a sense kind of looks at migration cinema from the other perspective, from across the Mediterranean, looking at European filmmakers who are tackling the question of migration to Europe. So that's, in a sense, an immediate sort of development of certain ideas that I was exploring in the last main chapter. But my current project is a book on, it's a critical biography of Fanon. Fanon has always been very important to me. I spent a lot of time with Fanon, obviously, a composite frame of Fanon and Césaire. And I should just actually say, Pat, that what you get with Césaire there is not the Cahiers de retour au pays natal. You get Moi laminaire. I mean, and that's a typical kind of sort of very playful move by Sissako that you'd expect, because that's what you're hearing, the extracts from Fanon and Césaire. But in fact, what you get visually is in disjunction, in sort of friction with the soundtrack. It's a typical, and I think really important and radical move by Sissako. I just had to say that because nothing is easy here. I mean, yes. things are complex.
Yes,
that's the beauty of it. And Fanon is part of that mix. The radio, is also Fanon and the Algerian Revolution. I mean, there's so many things that I was working through in that analysis of La Vie sur Terre by Sissako. And that inspired me to actually think about doing what I've always wanted to do, probably, which is a critical biography of Fanon. Fanon is an extraordinary figure that I'm in the process of trying to come to terms with, I suppose. There's so much that I want to explore for the first time in his work. All the stuff that has just been recently rediscovered, republished, for example, apart from the main works that were published during his lifetime and shortly after. There's a new body of work from Fanon that I'm working through, and it's astonishing. The doctor, but also the intellectual. It's a fascinating mix.
This sounds great. I'm looking forward to that already. Listen, James, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Pleasure.
Congratulations again on writing such a wonderful book, which this book will be a point of reference for many years to come. And I know I'll be going back to your book again and again. And I look forward to obviously to reading and what you have to say, your critical biography of Fano. So thank you for taking the time, and good evening and good night.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.